Hi, and welcome to Thursday Comics. Today we're talking about The Mighty Thor, number 155. Now Ends the Universe. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater. Issue 2 should be out soon. And Fantastic Four Grand Design. There's a new printing of it on the way from Marvel Comics. And Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. This is part 2 of the Mangog story, where we finally get a confrontation between Thor and the Mangog, as we see represented on this cover. A little bit about the Mangog. I find it a compelling visual, a compelling villain story-wise, and just trying to sort of figure it out a little. I'm trying to make sense of what the Mangog is. Magog was like a mythical figure. I don't know, but I'm trying to figure out, visually, what Mangog is. And so, like, story-wise, Mangog is this, creature from ancient times, from the youth of Odin that Odin vanquished. Maybe before Thor and Loki were even born, or maybe when they were children, but something from sort of the distant past of Odin's life. And so I'm thinking maybe it's got something to do with the cow that came out of the ice that was part of the story of Bor and Bori, part of seen in I think the first installment of Tales of Asgard. So maybe this is, somehow related to that. Maybe this is that cow had a husband, and a long lost husband who's sort of, back and out for revenge, and that's Mangog. Or maybe Mangog is kind of, somehow like visually a biblical reference to the golden calf idol, the god that was worshipped in the story of Moses, and that maybe Mangog is sort of like an amped up. It's that golden calf all grown up into this monster, or a creature from another pantheon coming to fight this Norse mythology pantheon. Maybe, again, like the Minotaur or something. Maybe a version of that. There was Mutaurus, kind of like this Minotaur creature in one of the Tales of Asgard stories. So maybe it's along those lines. Like, yeah, it's supposed to be the Minotaur. Like, I think a lot of this stuff just sort of came out of Kirby's, unconscious mind, sort of, which is why so many of his creations have this authority to them, as if they've always been there. They're a little bit alien, but also kind of familiar, sort of, pulled from the collective unconscious. I think all of those questions, all of those mysteries are part of what makes the Mangog so compelling, and works in the story too, because for the first few issues you have no clue of what Mangog really is until the final chapter where the mystery is solved. So it creates a tension in the story. So we start off with this great splash page, amazing foreshortening. Yeah, just thinking about the influence that just this image itself had on me as a kid. Okay, this is what Marvel is. It's in your face. It's 3D, and you really get that sense here. And then we have this street scene with a lot of black ink and this ominous feel, and everybody in trench coats and fedoras, and it's getting cold, and there's a gathering storm. And then there's also kind of like a fun retro feel of this street scene with like people in fedoras, and I feel like in Marvel Comics, this kind of street scene, they kind of looked like this for like way after fedoras were sort of like a usual sight. I mean, by this point, even in the 60s, the fedora was kind of dying out a little bit. They say, Kennedy was the first president who, would be photographed outside without a hat on, and that just changed fashion forever. Even for me, like, when I started making comics professionally, I kind of wanted to do this kind of crowd scene. Like, there's just something cool about that look. But it was a choice that I had to make, and I had to sort of, and I chose to sort of try to lean into modern fashions and things. And sometimes, juxtaposed with that Kirby style. So you'd get somebody with like a mohawk or something, but drawn in that Kirby style. So it was an interesting juxtaposition. So again, we have a lot of buildup on these first couple pages of Thor, having this sense that something horrible is happening, but doesn't know quite what it is. And then we cut to Sif in her hospital room, and she's aware of some kind of vague danger too. And she looks almost as if she's in a trance. And then Thor appears, with this huge shadow. I'd like to see if this panel here would have been in pencil form, because it's got that sort of off balance feel that sometimes a Jack Kirby panel inked by Vince Colletta has, because there's some element that's being left out. It still works really well, but I'm sure Jack drew some kind of something over on the left side that would sort of balance the composition out a little more. And then we have this amazing panel of Thor in, half in shadow, half in the light, to where his face and helmet are completely blacked out. Just really, beautiful chiaroscuro. Really sells the icon that Thor is. I like the expression on Sif's face here. She's ready for action. She's got sort of a half smile. Thor zaps her with his hammer to magically speed up the healing at the protest of the nurse, and he sends her out of there. That which now transpires is not for mortal eyes. And then he swings his hammer, creates the vortex that teleports them instantly to the Rainbow Bridge of Asgard. We cut back to the story of Balder and Karnilla and the Legion of the Lost, set up in last issue. And now that begins to bear fruit, as it turns out they're not dead, they're not statues, they're simply frozen, and Karnilla unfreezes them and commands them magically to fight Balder. And so Balder's in the fight of his life. Again, there's all this setup. You think about what a story like this would be in a typical comic book. You'd have this new monster of the week, Mangog, show up, and then the hero fights him, and then it's all wrapped up in one issue. But all this, cutting to different things, it kind of builds up a narrative tension, and especially, the ways that these digressions and side plots still do connect back to the Mangog story. Asgard needs Balder, and he needs to get back there, but Karnilla wants him to stay with her. So, he's fighting to sort of, free himself so he can pitch in to help against the danger that threatens Asgard. Then we cut to the colonizers from a couple years back at this point, just kind of reminding you of a previous high point of the Thor series, that this was sort of the last time that this comic was firing on all cylinders. These were some of the characters you would have seen, and is a way of cluing you in to the grandiosity of this threat of the Mangog that Asgard faces by, that its effects are being seen on the other side of the universe. So a lot of interesting things functioning here, making the threat seem that much bigger, making the universe of this world seem that much larger and connected and cohesive. And as a kid reading this story, I hadn't read any of the old issues of Thor with the colonizers or anything like that. So it's like, wow, this Thor thing is pretty awesome. Looks like it's been awesome for a really long time. And there's all this, backstory and history that I can't wait to get back into. And then this image of the recorder flying past Ego the Living Planet. It's just such a compelling image, and really just sums up so much of the appeal that Jack Kirby's work has. And when Jack Kirby died, there was an obituary in the New Yorker that was illustrated by Gary Panter, and he chose this particular image to reference and pay homage to. And I was in high school when Jack Kirby died, and in high school, as part of our English class, we all had to have subscriptions to the New Yorker, and then we'd discuss, the short fiction that would be in there in class. And I remember just being very excited to see, having that, sense of recognition of I know this image. I know, this was a comic that was very dear to me, and now it's in the New Yorker of all places. And again, we're jumping all over, the universe that Jack Kirby had created this many years into Thor. He's got this rich world and this rich cast of characters, and he's got a mastery of it and an understanding of it that he can sort of jump around, weave his way through, and have it all, come together in the end. And so we get the Warriors 3, who also sort of organically developed in the course of Tales of Asgard, and are now, members of the cast of the modern day Thor stories. So we get this great splash page of them in the Asgard version of a bar fight, Loki comes in and screams and breaks up the fight. But suddenly, the shrill, piercing, raucous voice of Loki rents the air like a banshee's wail. Maybe this is mentioned in previous issues, but it seems to me like this is the first time I'm noticing, Loki's voice being referenced, because you read a comic and you sort of imagine what everybody sounds like. There's all these different things that are sort of left to your imagination. And I wouldn't have thought of Loki having like a sort of, shrill, high pitched, piercing voice. But here it is being spelled out. And it does make sense for this character. Like a Skeksis or something. The Crypt Keeper, maybe. Again, he's in charge. While Odin sleeps, the wrong guy is in charge of Asgard. And so he sends the Warriors 3 out to fight Mangog. Oh, they obey, but I mean, I'm sure they would have done it anyway. Loki thinks he's sending them to their death, but to them, this is sort of their duty to defend Asgard, except for Volstagg. And, there's some great little humor about him, being sort of cowardly, trying to get out of it. I must bid farewell to my devoted wife. Devoted wife, indeed. 'Twas to escape her ire that he did join us, lo, those many moons ago. So just really fun stuff. And now Thor has returned to Asgard. Same as the Warriors 3, Loki sends Thor out to fight the Mangog and die. And they have a little bit of argument back and forth. This is sort of an ongoing theme in Thor's story with Loki. He is trying to convince Loki to join forces with him. Let's team up and pool our resources and defeat the Mangog. So he's not just picking us all off one by one. But and that's maybe the heartache of Thor's life, that he's never able to convince his brother to sort of put down his jealousies, put down his enmities, and be true brothers to each other, and see the amazing things they could accomplish if Loki could do that. Get this great image of the Mangog trudging through, a flaming wasteland. And then just one of those magical panels of Mangog facing 3 giants, 3 of the storm giants. And their designs are just tremendous. I love the pop art comic book colors, the magentas, blues, and greens. This giant in the middle is sort of just this sort of, bestial, very cool drawing, but sort of something that you might see another artist coming up with. And then the one on the right is this kind of cool, got this interesting armor that sort of hints almost to sort of like a technological thing. He's got a version of the sort of club that Kalibak would wield in the New Gods. And then you have the one on the far left, which is almost in like pure sci-fi land, almost, this sort of, mythical storm giant, but, looks, straight out of science fiction. So we get a really nice range here. I really love this panel. Kirby was kind of holding back a little. He had the idea for New Gods while he was working on this stuff, but didn't want to hand it over to Marvel. But you can see it creeping in here. This is, very New Gods. And that aspect of it really appealed to me as a kid, that it's like, okay, this isn't just, some long ago and far away these and thous story. It's got all that, but then there's this really interesting, sort of sci-fi element that's sort of creeping in that you can't quite put your finger on. Then he defeats them and just really shows you how powerful he is, and don't let size fool you. Just really well done in a minimal number of panels. And then he approaches this Asgardian outpost, which again it's just such a beautiful drawing, very simple, very elegant, communicates so much, and it's just a really interesting design. And Mangog pulls it apart. And some people theorize that with this story, if Kirby had chosen to hand over New Gods to Marvel, this might be the way you segue into it. This might actually be the final destruction of the gods. Just really mind-blowing. I mean, I can't understate the influence this had on me as a creator, and just, fights his way through this army, just beautifully drawn, beautifully colored. And then employ the Odinian force arrow. There be no other weapon to stop one such as he. So be it. Let the arrow be launched. And so their costumes are, bright colors, half ancient, half futuristic. And then they launch this thing that is very clearly, a rocket. It's like it's a missile. It's a a kind of a Flash Gordon-y, sci-fi Art Deco rocket, but they're calling it the Odinian force arrow. So that sums up a lot of the appeal of these kind of comics that Kirby was making, this retro future, this 1 foot in the ancient past, 1 foot in the distant future. And then maybe another foot in 20th century kitsch, comic books, comic strips, sci-fi, toys, pop art, just massive destruction. They shatter a mountain above him, and it crumbles onto the Mangog. They run over to check out the rubble, but nothing stops this guy. We're really setting up the threat that he is. And he's lifting up this big mountain, rivaling, Spider-Man in that one issue where he lifts up that heavy machinery. And Thor's watching this all on the mystic Visi crystal. Before he heads out, he pays a visit to his father, who's still in the midst of the Odin sleep. Sif gives him a hug goodbye, and off he goes. Wandering through this amazing looking, fantasy wasteland. I like this sort of, lizard demon creature that's, wrapped around this, dead tree, watching it all. Just, this is one panel of a comic, but it's just this amazing fantasy image. And then he finds one of the guys, from earlier in the issue who was destroyed by the power of the Mangog, and describes what he saw to Thor before he dies. All the power of a billion warriors are possessed by Mangog. He hath sworn to herald Ragnarok, and he cannot be denied. The Mangog is going to bring about the end of, the world for the Norse gods, and maybe the universe. Then he finds some more guys, an entire legion who've been trashed by Mangog. Then he finds the Asgardian outpost that's been completely destroyed. And again, it's got all kinds of technology that you wouldn't associate with mythological beings, unless it's, one of, Jack Kirby's techno god futures. Again, Thor is morphing into the new gods at this point. Kirby can't help himself. He tried to hold back, but he just couldn't help himself. He wants to create. This really great situation. We find these giant pieces of rock that were put together to trap the Warriors 3. One little sword arm sticks out. This little fort kind of reminds me of, if you ever read the script, Mario Puzo's script for the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie. He talks about constructing the Fortress of Solitude, and he constructs it the same way, taking giant glaciers and icebergs and whatnot, and forming them together into sort of a rudimentary fortress, unlike the sort of crystalline Kryptonian construction that happens in the finished film. And so we get this fun little moment with the Warriors 3, but Mangog's still out there, and now he grabs Thor and gets his hands around his throat, and it's looking pretty bad. Verily we say, continueth. Hero and the monster, the hero and the villain, finally clash. At the very end of the second issue, they finally clash. So there's, Kirby's figuring out a new cadence, a new rhythm with which to tell his comic book superhero stories. Can you imagine, another comic in that, like a Superman comic or something where this happens? No, of course not. And when I read this story as a Thor Treasury edition, it was, an early example of a graphic novel. It was this, big, huge, compelling comic book story that felt like the exact perfect length. It doesn't feel padded. It feels like it's unfolding at the pace it needs to unfold, and everything is just grand and wonderful. And who's not going to buy the next issue? I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater. Issue 2's out. Issue 2 will be out this month. And there's a new edition of Fantastic Four Grand Design coming soon. Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee, are still available, and make the perfect Christmas gift for the comics fan in your life.